This is Real People, Real Stories. The purpose of these interviews is to uplift, motivate, and encourage. And remember, these are real people with real stories. It's not your story or mine, it's their stories and their testimonies. God first and overcome by testimony.
Check. I get wins.
Let's get my guy on the screen right now. Bill, you there? Can you see me?
Hey.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Clap it up. Clap it up. It's a blessed night. Another Thursday. It's a new day, a new time, a new dispensation. Telling this brother late last night, you know, we can do all things through Christ. So, but before we even do any of that, of course, like I said, shouts out to all the listeners, Real Underground Radio. This is Real People, Real Stories, the premiere. So we're just gonna get straight into it. I'm glad everybody waited. You know, you won't be sorry for waiting on this one, man. It's gonna be an action-packed night. Hope everybody got their popcorn on deck, got everything we need. Put that logo up, Real People, Real Stories. Bill, tell the people where you're from and just a little bit about yourself briefly, and then I'll get into the real meat and potatoes here.
I grew up in Southern Florida, and I came out to California back in 1981, and I've lived out here now about 45 years.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So with that being said, just for the most part, let's just hop straight into it. Let's talk about deliverance. I know we spoke about this over the years, but just tell the people, I'm just getting straight into it because, you know, no need to waste time, about deliverance from alcoholism, deliverance from addiction. Tell the people about how you overcame addiction from the enemy, addiction of the flesh, and just addiction and alcoholism. Let them know that story, Bill.
Well, I'll preface it by saying when I was young, I grew up in a broken family and I developed hatred in me. And that gave me the curiosity to want to find marijuana, drugs, etc. And I got into it. And by the time I was 16, I was selling pounds of pot. And by the time I was, then it turned into bales. And shortly after, garbage cans full of cocaine. That was the new thing. And it didn't take long for me to become addicted to myself to coke. And one day, when the helicopters were flying over and keeping track of me, because my dad had let me hear lots of audio tapes of my conversations that were being done by the DEA.
Wow.
How they didn't arrest me is a miracle unto itself. But
now wait a minute, Bill, real fast. Where were you at during this time period?
South Florida, during the peak of the whole, drug explosion that happened to America, which was all driven by George Bush Sr., by the way, but that'll get me shot for talking more about that. But these are all things I figured out after the fact, not at the time.
Yes.
But there was a day there where I was busy, putting some stuff in bags, and a helicopter was flying overhead, kind of like in that movie with Ray Liotta. I can't remember the author's name, but I met him a few times and talked with him. And he was trying to tell me I should share my life story. He said, "Man, this would make a really good book and a movie." And I was like, "Yeah, but I don't want to know the people you know. And I've put all that behind me, so I'm not about to start advertising who I am and what I've done."
This is exclusive right here. And
I've struggled for years to try to figure out how I can tell my story in a way that will actually be useful to the world, as opposed to some, braggadocious story about me, and drugs, because I'll never glorify it. Drugs destroyed me, if anything. But there was a day that it just hit me that I had become the devil himself. And that it dawned on me as I was suffering from my own addiction with a garbage can full of coke in front of me, that I'd been poisoning our country by doing what I did, because people were coming from all over the country to get this stuff. And it was being supplied by our, good old faithful American Coast Guard. They just take half off the top, and nobody who gets arrested wants to talk about how, no, I had more drugs, not less. Wow. So that made for a very convenient way for the CIA to fund all of their operations, I suppose. I guess I was just one small contributor, but there was a day when I was asked if I'd like to go meet Pablo, and that's when I knew that I'd gone too far. Anyways, when I recognized that the devil had a hold of me and that I'd become one of his merchants, that was the day I stopped doing it and stopped doing, selling anything altogether. And I ran down to my grandfolks' house, and shortly after my grandfather died, and I stayed and took care of my grandma and went back to school and learned film and television. And but you come out here and the devil's just waiting for you to, rejoin the team. And it didn't take long after so many failed pitches of trying to make God-inspired films or television that I realized I couldn't make a living doing this if I wanted to do what I wanted to do. So I started listening to the studios and the agents, and they were like, no, write scripts like this, give us this and that. And I started writing the kind of scripts that they wanted, and they kept stealing them. I kept watching all my stuff get stolen and not get paid for it.
But 1 second though, for that transition, that's very important and pivotal to the story about transitioning from Florida to California. To go kind of put emphasis on that as to how did that mindset come about from God, like you said, about making the movies that you wanted to make. Speak on that transition.
Well, the transition is after my grandfather died, he left me a little bit of money, and I took a trip to Europe with a couple of guys I thought were friends. They turned out not to be, but nevertheless, I went there, and when I realized I was going to Italy, I thought, well, I want to meet the Pope, because I was studying Aikido. Wow. A martial art from Japan that teaches you how to defend yourself without hurting people, or at least that's the goal. And one of the students was a priest from a Catholic church. He used to be a pimp down in Cuba, and he found God, and his goal became to be a priest, and he became one. He was head of a church, and that's where we did our Aikido practices at. And we're a pretty, interesting group of people. And one day we went out in the Everglades and stayed in some cabin there, and we each had to make a family crest, but of who we were, not as who our family was. And mine was, in symbology, was to use media to spread the word of God throughout the world using media. And I didn't quite know what that meant to me, but it was all I could come up with at 21 years old, or 20, or whatever I was. And that became a bond that I made with God, and I didn't even realize it. So when I came out to California, so I went to Italy, and I wrote a permission to speak to the Pope. And you can do that. You can go up to the Swiss Guard and you fill out some papers and explain why you want to talk with the Pope. And I did. And they told me come back Thursday at 2:00, whatever it was. I have the piece of paper that proves it. So people are all like, you met the Pope, you're full of it. But I got the thing. It's all in Latin. So good luck. If you know how to read Latin, you can read it. But I met the Pope, and what I told him was I was considering becoming a priest. But I had 2 questions, or 3. And one was, why should I pray to Mary, much less tell people to say, Hail Marys, if the Bible also says never to pray to graven images? And there's nothing in the Bible that said Mary died on the 3rd day and rose to heaven. So praying to Mary is praying to a graven image. And there's a lot of actual symbology of what Mary really even means, but it has nothing to do with Jesus. The Catholic Church has nothing to do with Jesus. It's a satanic organization, in my opinion, but that's just my opinion. Hopefully I don't get killed for getting out my opinion.
No, protected by the blood. Yes, sir.
The Pope said to me, by the way, I can't hear you. I've got my volume up, but
can you hear me?
If you could put your volume up, I could hear you better.
Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you. Yeah. So
Okay.
intercede or interrupt.
Well, let me say this then, Bill. Yes, just to keep, because I know, like I said, and to all the people out there, the listeners, they're really tapped in, they're commenting, they're interacting. By the way, hit the share button, everybody. We want this power to get out to the world. We already had about 50 to 100 in before he got here. We normally do about 700, 1,000 people. We want to get 10,000, 20,000, the world, the remnant, like I told this brother yesterday. But Bill, if you could, to speak definitely and just get into that, about that deliverance, as we heard, and we'll hear more, of course, coming up about his background, about what he did, is so many things. But that deliverance, because it's a lot of youth out here. It's a lot of people addicted to the world, addicted to the ailments, the things that they think are good. So just speak on that for him.
Well, when my first curiosities of pot, where I saw the hippie kids running around having a blast smoking pot, and I was like, wow, I'd like to be happy like that, because I was miserable. I had a stepmother who, took joy in torturing me. And
wow.
I was the big brother, so I had to look after my brother and sister, and their lives were just being destroyed as well by her. She wanted to clear out the nest, so to speak, so she could have her own nest of kids. And what she didn't understand is my dad had no intention of ever giving her any children, and he never did. But didn't stop her from trying, and she made our lives a living hell. And just to be short, so I really wanted to smoke pot. I wanted to escape my reality. I made sure I failed in school, so that'd make my dad proud.
Wow.
And I went into the work experience program at 13 years old and started working instead of going to school.
Now tell the people who your father was, well, not who he was, but the position that he held, the position. You can just tell the position.
Well, he started as an attorney and paid for it by joining the Army and the Navy after the war. And that helped him get through college. And then my family, everybody chipped in to help him get through law school. And he was another ambulance chaser, with great aspirations to be somebody, whatever that meant. But my great-grandmother left me a small fortune that I was unaware of, and he was made the trustee of, and he raided my trust and paid for a law firm to be built, and bought us a nice fancy house on an exclusive island with all the other fancy people with all their money. Half of them were criminals and judges. It was just growing up in the midst of people with too much and kids that were spoiled. And I had to work all week on a 2-acre plot of land to trim all the bushes and things like that to make my father happy. And I'd get $1.50 to be able to go roller skating on the weekends. And I'll just add, that's where I started hearing Michael Jackson music and really started to enjoy his music when I was young.
And
but
get to that.
Since that time, I kept working, and I got in some trouble and ended up in a thing called Florida Marine Institute, where I guess spoiled kids get a chance to straighten their life out before they end up going to juvenile detention, aka state prison for kids. And it made a big difference. I learned how to scuba dive. I learned about marine biology. I gained a sense of confidence in myself by accomplishing those things. Had to take senior life saving, where they dumped you off a boat 2 miles out shore with the currents that are there that'll just sweep you off into the middle of the Atlantic. So no easy task, but I made it to shore barely. And that helped me to pass the tests I needed to become a scuba diver and scuba dive instructor. So that was one of my fantasies to have happen.
Now again, when we transition to the West Coast, and I want you to get on into that deliverance of God. And then we got to, because then I want to speak on, like you said, he mentioned that he started liking Michael Jackson. And again, like I told y'all before he got here, he dealt with the man, he worked with him, and he just has some insight. We'll do part 1 tonight, and then coming up again down the line, we'll do a part 2. But just tell about the deliverance of God. You said you fell to your knees. Just get into that, Bill. Let them know.
God bless you. for tapping in with this great interview. It's all done through Yahweh, God first, and all the connections he's allowed me to get. You got feedback? You got topics that you want me to ask the person? You got any questions? Anything that we didn't answer in full? Hit me up. Just send an email to 8amexposure@gmail.com. It's going to be listed right here on the screen. So hit me up. Let your voice be heard in this new year, 2025. Real people, real stories. Talk to me.
God's life, what you think that it ain't? Even when they doubt and they feeling to talk about him. Even when they hating, Jesus needed around them. That's why I'm painting these pictures and I frame it. So these devils see what I'm kicking lyrics, confound them, astounding. Yahweh's spirit is boundless, sounding like you don't want savings amountless, countless. Sin was given, but God counted. Yahshua, that paid our balance. Doubting the Messiah is dangerous to do. Only way to get to the Father is grace through Yahshua. Righteous renew when we fall short daily. Of course, the Lord moves.